Okay. And should I let everyone in from the waiting room, John?
Do you admit them one at a time, or is it one click?
I just, in the top, I can click admit all, and then they're all
Great.
coming. And should I let everyone in from the waiting room, John?
Do you admit them one at a time, or is it one click? Hi, everybody. So we're going to wait. Maybe we'll start at 6:32. So I see lots of people I know. Everybody's audio is off. We'll put that on when we get to Q&A. If you don't want to put your camera on, I think there's a feature where you can put your hand up. How many people are Pratt students? Anybody? How many people are Pratt alums, my former students? Cool. Carol, hi. How many people are deans or chairs in other schools? I sent a mailing to all the schools. Anybody show up? No? So we're going to wait 3 more minutes. Hi, Ellen. Hi, Bruce. Seeing all kinds of people from my past. And we'll start at 6:32. If anybody emails you that they can't get in, they go to Pratt's YouTube page. You can see streaming there. Hi, everybody. Thanks for showing up. Hey, Larissa and Aisha, hi. Hi, Bruce. Okay, it's about 6:32. Welcome, everybody. I'm flattered that you've all come out for this talk. Welcome to Pratt's lecture series. Gee, I don't know. Maybe, Frederica, maybe you could put a link in the chat room where people can go to find out about the rest of our Pratt events. But anyway, my name is John Lobell, and in back of me is Piranesi's map of Rome. And when I was a student at Penn, Kahn had this map in his office, and we all, somebody, was before the days of Xeroxing, but somebody made a photostat of it, and a lot of us students got photostats full size. Piranesi made it out of about 9 pieces, but we had, I still have it rolled up in my office, if I can ever get back there. So, well, we got more people to admit here. So thanks everybody for coming, and I'm going to talk about my new book on the architect Louis Kahn. So let me see if I can share screen, find my slides, share. I'm not in the right spot. Go back here, go to full screen. There we go. So when Kahn died in 1974, I wrote a very short piece for Art America, where I knew the editor, and she turned it down. And I showed it to some colleagues who said, "You haven't made the case." And I referred to Kahn as a spiritual master. And so I realized that I hadn't made the case. And doing so was my first book, in which I looked at Kahn's spiritual thought. And this book looks at how Kahn's buildings express his philosophy. So a little bit about me. Let me just get a laser pointer here. Hang on. Where's my cursor? Where'd it go? Here it is. And then laser pointer. There we go. So I teach at Pratt, where I've been for, I'm embarrassed to say, 50 years. I do some online courses at Build Academy, some MOOCs. I studied at Penn. I didn't take Kahn's studio, but I was there with him for 7 years. I studied with Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown. One of the faculty most influential on me was Edmund Bacon, and I'm a huge admirer of G. Holmes Perkins, who put the school together. At Pratt, I teach a course in Kahn and Venturi, and a group of other courses you can eyeball here. I was an environmental sculptor. One of our Pratt colleagues is here, and he built the framework for this thing, which I did in 1967. So we have some old colleagues here. I worked in interesting offices for Harrison and Bolovitz on Albany Mall, Oleg Franzen on New Urban Technologies. I'm Director of Research for Timeship, a next generation cryonics facility. If you go to johnlobell.com, you'll find all this. And there's about 100 of my lectures on YouTube. So that's me. And I've been taking advantage of COVID to do my favorite thing, which is sit on the bed with a whole pile of books and read, take notes, and write books. So I actually did 4 of them during this year. And we're going to talk today about my first book on Kahn, about his spiritual philosophy, and this is 1979. And then my new book just came out a few weeks ago with Monticelli Press, who have done a really great job with the book. So I was just looking at my new book, and I see, just what quote should I grab? It was just a few minutes ago. Let me get my cursor back so I can see this. There we go. So Kahn spoke in poetic and mystical terms, saying things like order, beginning, silence, and light, asking things like, what does this building want to be? What do you want, brick? And most dismiss these sayings as mystical poetry. They could sound profound, but what do they mean? So even you know, what does this building want to be? There are two things wrong with that. I ask my students to raise their hands. We can't do that here, but number one is it's a building. How can it want anything? And number two is it doesn't even exist. We haven't designed it yet, much less built it, which is saying something. In other words, he's saying that the existence will of this building is there before we even design it. And he sees the creative process of the architect somewhat like that of a midwife, not to, out of their ego, design their thing, but to help the building, which has a force of its own, come into manifestation. And he's not the only one thinking this way. Mies van der Rohe, architect of glass and steel, architecture is the real battleground of the spirit. Architecture depends on its time. It is the crystallization of its inner structure, the slow unfolding of its form. Now, in my course, we have time to go into this. Kahn's not quite saying the same thing, because Mies is very much in his time. The Seagram building is a manifestation of the organization man of the corporate 1950s. Kahn is trying to build outside of time. So let me just get my cursor back because we've got someone who wants to get in. So I named my book Architecture as Philosophy, and I begin with philosophy is an attempt to, I like to give my students, there's only one question, it's got two parts. Who are we and what are we doing here? So philosophy is an attempt to answer that. But is not such understanding also a role of the arts in general and architecture in particular? And then I go on to favor architecture because we read philosophy while sitting on a chair, but we're born, we live, and we die in buildings. We work in, house our culture in, and are entertained in buildings. We learn and do research in, and manage our corporations from buildings. We experience buildings, we exist in buildings. So philosophy is about, architecture is our existence. Now, just to sort of look at where we are now, I like to say we're in a golden age of architecture. And whenever I'm lecturing and I present this, I love this quote from Frank Gehry. Let the experience begin. Boy, were we not allowed to do this when I was in school. Frank Gehry, these incredible buildings. Now, two of them in New York. Zaha Hadid, and this ski thingy is taken from Russian constructivism. It's great stuff. And one of these is in New York. Santiago Calatrava, his son taught at Pratt, and he's been very kind to us at Pratt with these incredible buildings. Diller and Sclaffidio, I love this, a building made out of steam. And that was a real project because it turns out there's pollution in the lake. So if you turn it into steam and people breathe it, they'll get sick. So they had to purify it before they could steam it. And then this incredible thing she worked on the High Line. And I got to confess to being slow. I didn't get to Hudson Yards, and now it's too late. I have to wait. I haven't gotten my vaccine yet. But it's on my list as soon as I do. But what do we think of this architecture? Oh, by the way, if you're not familiar with this, the building in the middle right. Each floor in this building rotates independently of the other floors. The engineer who's working on time shift for us is the engineer for this building. So we're doing some amazing stuff today. But I look at these two buildings, the Bird's Nest in Beijing, the Olympics, and Kahn's Kimball building, and they go a little bit modern. Isn't the structure supposed to make sense? All the fibers for this bird nest, which are made out of 1 foot by 1 foot steel tubing, an incredible computer design job to prefabricate all of these and then to assemble them so they perfectly fit. But it has nothing to do with the building. It's applied around the building, which is already structurally and functionally there. We weren't allowed to do that when I was a student. So I'm more in the generation of Kahn's Kimball Art Museum. And here we have the structure, poured in place exposed concrete, and then infill of non-bearing masonry walls. So let's make sure I can advance here. Talk about Kahn, 1901 to 1974. And he was both a teacher and a practitioner. So on top left are photos of him in the office, talking with Commandant, the great concrete engineer who did many of his buildings. Here's Kahn with Dean Perkins, Commandant, Norman Rice. Kahn knew Norman Rice in high school. They went to architecture school together. And then Norman was the first American to go to France and work for Corbu. And Kahn taught up here in the Furnace building, now the Fisher Fine Arts building. Now, I just happened to, right now, I broke off just to do this lecture. I am so engrossed in doing a book on the Philadelphia School, and where I was a student. And keep getting admits here. It flourished from 1950 to 1965, and it was a synergy of the city, the profession, and education. And we know it for Kahn and Venturi. G. Holmes Perkins put it together, but there were numerous other major figures there, Edmund Bacon, Denise Scott Brown, on and on. And the school had a broad cultural orientation and saw history as a physical and ideological continuum, and was very concerned about the urban context, plan as a generator of meaning, and structure as ordering. So let's look at Kahn's first major building, the medical towers. I had the good fortune, this building was going up across from my dorm when I was a freshman. So it became, we studied there. We would visit there for our structures courses and our materials courses. And I don't know how applicable it is here, but I like this paraphrase I did of a quote from Harold Brown. I'm sorry, Harold Bloom, the literary critic. There are no works of art, only commentary on other works of art. So we really understand the medical towers to a great extent as a reaction to Mies's Seagram building. Now, they're both built at the same time, but Mies was doing this in other buildings earlier. And see how Mies gathers the core and then has open, flexible space around it, whereas Kahn pulls the core functions out to have a totally free pavilion. So let's see how he arrives at that. So here's the plan. central core with, let me get my laser pointer back. Central core with mechanical elevators, second means of egress, toilets, and then 3 pavilions per floor. This is exceptional because it's the entrance pavilion, but it should look like the rest on a typical floor. And then pulling our air ducts and stairs out, and then putting our structure where it won't interfere with any of these other functions. So inspired by this, a lot of buildings started putting towers on themselves, but that isn't really what Kahn was doing. He started with, there are 2 parts to science. First is measurement. So you've got a lab table, you're doing experiments, and you want that to be away from the light, you want it to be in an open, flexible space. And then he says, the scientist takes their data and goes to the light, sits at a desk at the window, and works on rendering their observations into a theory, which is a cultural act. Now we got to hold that up. We don't want any columns interfering in our flexible space. We don't want them in the corners because there they will block our view. So we put them in the 3rd points. We then span across and span on the outer edges for our structure. We then have to get in and out. We need a second means of egress. We need air ducts. We see that in orange here. We've got 3 of these, and then they all share a central core with additional services. So here it is going up, and it's precast, pre-stress, post-tension. And so each of these columns come in 1 floor. They're lifted in by a monster crane, which Kahn said the precast concrete piece is the brick of the 20th century. Your hand can lift a brick, the crane can lift one of these things. Now, if we were at Pratt and Higgins Hall, we could point out that Stephen Hull used this same approach in the new center part at Higgins, and we could actually see the structure right there. So here is how this Lego block construction is put together. And these little guys here were a mistake. And he left them out of the next wing of the building. But he's got these huge verandales. A verandale is a truss without diagonals. So they open up so you can thread mechanical through there, the lighting, etc. And these are monster verandale girders. And these are in 3 pieces. Well, that won't work. How do you put tension in them? Well, what they did, that's the post-tensioning. They threaded rebars into holes cast into the member and then tightened them up with a pneumatic jack like the ones they take the wheel off of your car at the garage. And then it's a great breathing machine. So the air comes in, he calls these nostrils, go up these towers into where the air handling equipment is, then comes down, goes into a laboratory where it becomes contaminated, is incinerated, and is exhausted out. So the building is telling us how it is put together structurally and how it is working as mechanically as a breathing machine. And every time you walk into the building, the story I just told you is told to you. You look up and there's the whole story. And Kahn says, the building is the story of the making of the building. The man is the story of the making of the man. So that this building communicates to us who and what we are as we use it, as we experience it. Now, this building had a lot of really big problems. And in my course, we can spend time on that, but there were problems with the light and there were problems with the dust accumulating on the exposed ceilings. And it got old. more than 50 years old, and laboratories don't last that long. Should they tear it down? Well, they weren't going to tear it down. So they changed it from what they call a wet lab to a dry lab. A dry lab means it's an office building for scientists. And it is, Kahn would be so delighted. They have these modern gizmos up here that have, where's my, here we go. The light and the air handling are all in these units, highly compact, fitting in the ceiling. There's now a waiting list to get in the building. So Jonas Salk saw a presentation on this building, decided he wanted one for his research laboratory. While I get a cursor and let somebody in. And it started with a complex campus. It was going to have meeting houses and housing for the scientists. And in the end, all they were able to do was the laboratories, which we see here. Columns, giant verandales, mechanical threads through here. These are the studies for the scientists. He and Salk talked about the realm of oak, which was these scientists' studies, and they like to have big oak tables, and a realm of stainless steel, which were the labs. And it alternates lab floor, mechanical floor, lab floor, mechanical floor. And here is the courtyard, like a cathedral, open to the sky. Now, Kahn uses the terms form and design. Form is the what, the existence will. Design is the how, the manifestation of the form within circumstances. The medical towers and Salk are totally different designs, but the same form. The same underlying conceptual organization, but different designs for different sites and different circumstances. So I see that in parallel to what I learned from Joseph Campbell, who in The Hero with 1,000 Faces talks about the archetype and the manifestation. So the archetype would be the hero journey. Separation from ordinary reality at a threshold, journey to a realm of fabulous forces, encountering hero helpers, a decisive victory is won, and a return to enrich the world. That's the archetype. Manifestation is, well, that's Buddha, Christ, Muhammad, and Moses. That's Jack and the Beanstalk. That's Odysseus. Those are the manifestations. So I was able to, because I was studying Tai Chi with Ching-Ming Chen, Buddhism with Tugden Trungpa Rinpoche, mythology with Campbell, I was able to decipher Kahn's mystical writing. That's what I did in my first book. As I said in my second book, we're talking about now, I then see how this manifests in his buildings. So, what is science? Kahn writes, where is the scientist and where is the poet? The poet is one who starts from the seat of the unmeasurable and travels toward the measurable, keeps the force of the unmeasurable with him at all times. The scientist has unmeasurable quality as a man, but he holds his line and does not travel with the unmeasurable because he's interested in knowing. So these two qualities of the measurable and the unmeasurable are what Kahn is providing manifestation for in the plan. He said a good plan is one in which the rooms have spoken to each other, in which their meanings of what they're doing is apparent by the organization of the plan, and the structure should be helping that organization. So some other Kahn buildings, Kimball Museum, with this exposed concrete cycloid vault or cycloid shell, not a vault. And then it looked terrible, looked like a sidewalk. Then they put the reflectors in to reflect the light coming in through the slit down the middle, and it turns silver in the light. And it differentiates between the structure and the non-structural infill. Yale, one of my colleagues regularly takes a studio to Philadelphia and to Yale. We get 2 Kahn buildings and a Paul Rudolph building. Actually, there's about 3 or 4 Paul Rudolph buildings around the city. And then Bangladesh, which has come to our attention in Nathaniel Kahn's award-winning movie, My Architect. Highly recommended if you haven't seen it. He ties biography together with the architecture, but the presentation of the architecture is excellent. And then other kinds of explorations. Again, one of their responses to the Seagram building with Anting, he does City Office Tower. We know that there's got to be either shear walls or diagonal bracing in a high-rise building to resist wind forces. You don't see it in the Seagram building. You do see it here. And then we have one right here in New York, 4 Freedoms. So, quick look at Kahn's philosophy. Now, I'm finding my colleagues referring to Kahn's architecture as monumental. I disagree. Monumental doesn't just mean big. Monumentality is a celebration in form of a past that we value and feel is still alive in us. So the Beaux-Arts vocabulary was Roman, saying that we today, or 1941 in the case of the National Gallery, are Greek, Roman, and European in our origins and in our culture. We don't accept that anymore. Modern architecture rejects monumentality. The program of modernism was to make a new human being and a new society, to reject the past, and to create a universal materialist culture rooted in science and reason, not the past. Therefore, a rejection of monumentality. Well, where did Kahn stand? Well, he rejected imitating the past, but he also rejected modernist materialism. He pursued a third way, which he called order. So he said it was not monumentality, a rootedness in a European past, that modern architecture was lacking, but order, a rootedness in its own nature. So if he says, client comes and says, I need a school, he brings the project to his studio where everybody's going to sit around and talk about it. And he says, what does this building want to be? What he means is, what is the inner essential nature of school that is attempting to manifest itself and that our building should help bring about? Now, that's called essentialism, and it's very widely rejected in philosophical thought today, but it's the way Kahn thought. So he stops talking. He did speak about monumentality up until 1947. But in the early 50s, he stopped and starts talking about order. And he ends up saying, I stopped by not saying what order is, just saying order is. Now, order is the way of all things. It's what the Chinese mystics call the Tao, which is the way of all things. And I just said what order is, not supposed to. And, but what is all things? You can't say. It's like, can you describe God? Well, God is beyond concept. So concepts can't describe God. Order is beyond concept. So when you can't describe something, you use a poetic metaphor. And the poetic metaphor he uses is silence and light. Silence, the unmeasurable desire to be. Light, the measurable, giver of all presence by will, by law. So imagine you're going to design a building. Where is it before you design it? It's in the realm of silence. It has the potential to be. It has to have the potential to be, or otherwise it could never be. That's what potential is. Light is realization. Aha, this is what it's going to be. But it's still conceptual. So then we have to get it into material. So light is, I said that all material in nature, the mountains and the streams and the air and we, are made of light which has been spent. So when the light hits the wall, it condenses into the material of the wall. And then we have material. And now we get his famous question. A recent biography of Kahn is titled, "You Say to Brick." You say to brick, what do you want, brick? Brick says, I like an arch. If you say to brick, arches are expensive and I can use a concrete lintel over an opening. What do you think of that, brick? Brick says, I like an arch. Now, Kahn's not alone in thinking this way. Turn to Louis Sullivan, pioneer of modernism, Franklin Wright's mentor. And in his last book, on the opening page, he has this image of a seed. Imagine a peanut and you split it open. And here's the germ. And the germ is the part that's going to grow. And the rest of it is just providing the nutrients until photosynthesis gets going. Get my laser pointed back. So he writes, the germ is the real thing, the seed of identity. Within its delicate balance, within its delicate mechanism lies the will to power, the function, which is to seek and eventually to find its full expression in form. Well, we think of that as DNA, but as Kahn would put it, the acorn wants to be an oak tree. Well, we got to hang on, I got to get my cursor right away. We just can, Moisha Softy just showed up. So Franklin Wright speaks in similar terms. What would be the honor of a brick? That in the brick which makes the brick a brick. So the notion here is that the brick is initially an essence which gathers to it squareness, hardness, redness, and that's what he calls the honor of the brick. The brick wants to be. So, Kahn says, a work is made in the urging sounds of industry, and when the dust settles, the pyramid, echoing silence, gives the sun its shadow. Now, if we were at Higgins Hall, we'd all go upstairs. There'd be autographing. You could flip through the book. But if you go to Monticelli Press or Amazon, both of them allow you to flip through the book, several dozen pages are there. And we would have pizza. So everybody has to now eat the pizza at home because we're not there. Thank you. So let me go to stop share. And let's see how much discussion we can encourage. So let's see. Let's go to allow people to unmute themselves. You can unmute yourself. Good. Oh, wait a minute. Now you can.
Yeah, everyone can unmute themselves now.
Good. So if you have a question, you can post it in chat, but better just speak up. Just like my students, nothing to say. Carl Smith, what are you thinking? You got to unmute yourself.
Unmute. It was a very excellent talk, I thought. I studied with Kahn in 71, 72.
Fantastic.
And I retired last year at age 77. But after Kahn's class, I traveled around the world for 3.5 years with Peter Dominic from Colorado, who's a classmate of mine at University of Pennsylvania. And we were in New Guinea, Australia, Japan, Hong Kong, and had a fantastic experience. But I've always revered or looked to Lou in everything that I did during my life. And I really appreciate having the experience of being with him. And that's all I have to say.
Great. There's a book, Kahn at Penn. Do you have that?
Yeah.
Great.
By Williamson?
Yeah, he does a terrific. Did you get interviewed?
Yeah, I have a couple quotes and examples in there.
Great. So
yeah.
just to explain, the master's studio, the non-professional one-year master's studio at Penn was 1 year in a studio with Kahn. And Carl was one of the fortunate people to go through that experience of probably about, I think, 300 of them over the years. And so there's a book now, Kahn at Penn, which interviews everybody and tells a lot of stories about that experience.
James Williamson.
Thanks.
Yeah, and in my class, there were 14 of us, and 10 of them were foreign students. And
well, the secret is Perkins did that to get well-connected people. If you could afford to come here for a year, you probably were well-to-do in your country. And that way he could build relationships of the school to countries around the world.
Yeah, and when I was in Hong Kong, there was a Portuguese architect who had done a lot of work in Macau, and I went to see his buildings, and sure enough, they were right out of the Kahn milieu.
Cool.
And I have some pictures of them, but here I was in Asia, the middle of Asia, in Macau, in a little island Taipa off of Macau, and there were these Kahn buildings here.
Cool.
So he had some influence around the world.
Great, thank you. So listen, anybody at all, but also any other Kahn students. Anne.
Oh, I just love the lecture. I want to share something that I didn't realize until fairly recently, but my father was apprenticed to John Lautner and also knew Kahn, and Kahn had asked him to be his in-house poet. And my dad couldn't do that. He had 4 kids, and he was a partner at an urban planning group in Boston. but I studied architecture and film, and I got to what we call spatial storytelling very, very early in the 80s. And I was I was trying to do some pretty far out things in the 80s. I was very into chaos theory and math, and I decided that I was going to try to grow films like fractals using chaos math.
Oh, cool.
And what's so funny is I came up with this concept that if I could bubble everything down to its tiniest diegetic core moment, that's a term I made up, diegetic core moment, meaning the smallest intelligible piece of a story, that I could plant it in seeds, plant it in math, like seeds, and watch it grow. And so I say grow stories, don't tell them. And I'm still working on all of that today with entertainment AI.
Right.
But what's so interesting is that, I had grown up surrounded by these luminaries in the architectural world. The Center for Advanced Visual Studies and Urban Design at MIT became the MIT Media Lab. And so people were always like, did you go there? Did you study there? And I said, no, I was raised there until my dad won the Prix de Rome and we moved to Italy. But what I was going to say is that a couple of years ago, a friend invited me up to a little picnic up at Eric Lloyd Wright's compound in Malibu. And he was sitting under this beautiful oak tree in the hills by a pond, and we were all gathered around him. And he started to tell this story of his grandfather, Frank Lloyd Wright, talking about the mighty oak trees and how from the tiny acorn, a mighty oak tree grew. And suddenly I realized that this was the philosophy that I had been educated with, all these eco-architects that, my dad and others around him were. And I really understood the roots of my own work. So I was just so thrilled that you brought up, it's in storage. An instructor gave it to me a long, long time ago. But I tried to get my dad to jump on the Zoom here, but I couldn't, with him being in LA and I'm up in the Rocky Mountains right now, I couldn't get him onto Zoom. But
Well,
I think
we're gonna post the recording so you can forward it to them.
on YouTube right now. And
if you go find my my email, you can just go to John Lobell Pratt and it'll pop up. I'll send you a whole bunch of architects who are actually doing what you're talking about, starting with a small set of rules, and then a whole building comes out of it. So my younger colleagues are doing that kind of thing.
It's actually how I applied to architecture school in 1981, I think, cool. When I gave an example of Mozart's Eine kleine Nacht music and how it's mathematically structured around a 2-note motive. But that, I was already making my own films at that time. So I started to think that way in terms of storytelling. It's really wonderful for me, at my age, to really start to understand the roots of my own work. It's pretty cool.
Great, thank you.
I would love to see those architects.
Yeah. So who else has any thoughts, comments, or questions?
John, I'm Nancy.
Hi.
I was thrilled to see you share so much of the Kimball. I live 2.5, maybe 3 miles from the Kimball, and it's annexed by Piano. And across the street is, see if I can pronounce it, Tadeo Ando?
Tondo Ando.
I mean, how lucky am I to
also
get
a Philip Johnson,
this.
right?
I beg your pardon?
There's also a Philip Johnson.
No, I think Tondo Ando and Piano.
Okay.
There's not a Philip Johnson in Fort Worth.
No.
Okay, got that wrong.
I mean, there are plenty. I came here from Houston. There's plenty of Philip Johnson in Houston.
Right.
Anyway, just thought I would share that.
Howard.
Yeah. So when was the last time you were there, and what do you think?
Of which? The buildings in Fort Worth?
Kimball.
Well, obviously, I haven't been in any of them for almost a year.
Yeah.
I used to go to the Modern, which is Tadeo Ando. I'm not, again, sure I pronounce it correctly. Used to go there almost once a week because they have wonderful experiences there. I make it to the Kimball probably twice a year. And by the way, they had a Louis Kahn exhibit that was about a year and a half, 2 years ago, was fabulous. It was just
So I saw it in
like you got
Philadelphia.
into him, just totally.
Yeah.
It was great. Anyway,
Well,
thought
so
I'd
who
share.
else saw the exhibit? It was all over the world.
Well, I saw it at the University of Pennsylvania about
Good.
4 years ago.
Good.
The Whitaker curated.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
He's been a big help for my books.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Right.
Well, years
So
ago,
what
I
do you
went to
get
Fort
your thoughts?
Worth to visit both those museums, and they're truly remarkable buildings and have very good collections. But what shocked me is there are no visitors.
Whoa.
The culture of the city seems to be that people like to give money for bricks, but they're not particularly interested in the art that's a consequence.
Which two projects were that?
Disappointing. Excuse me?
Which two projects were that?
In both of the museums we were just talking about, the Ando
Oh, yeah.
and the Kahn.
Have
I
you
was
been
studying-
to the Exeter Library?
No.
That is unbelievable.
Well, I thought the Ando building was really remarkable and beautifully built, which is sort of overwhelming how gorgeous this concrete is, which is what he's known for. I was studying architecture at Berkeley in the early 1960s and came east maybe in the mid 60s. And I had met Ricky Werman, Philadelphia architect at Berkeley, when he came for a short course. And I went to visit him in Philadelphia. And at one point he said, "You ought to go see Louis Kahn. You ought to go to his office." And I said, "Well, I can't do that. I'm a student and this is an internationally famous man. He doesn't have time for me." And he said, "No, do it." So I went there and he wasn't in the office, but there was an employee, a young Indian man who showed me around, very generously showed me a lot of work, and had quite an interesting visit. And Kahn came in, returned to the office, and he came over and he said, "Who are you and why are you here?" And I was a little bit put off by sort of the bluntness of that. But he immediately became an incredibly warm person. He said, "Well, you don't want to talk to that man. You want to talk to me. Talk to me." And we sat down and we talked about, he showed me buildings and he discussed the way he was treating light on a facade of building. And yet he was treating it the same way around the corner, 90 degrees to the one. And I said, "Well, I don't understand. The light is so different as you go around the corner, but you're treating it the same way," which is sort of for a student, fairly pretentious thing to say to a person like Louis Kahn. And he said, "You're absolutely right." He said, "I haven't finished studying that yet." And I've always been moved by that somebody with his reputation was willing to accept criticism from a very junior person and to discuss it and to want to see what the idea was there. And I remained impressed by that experience.
Great. Tell everybody who Ricky Sullivan is.
Well, he was a Philadelphia architect who later became very well known due to publications that he did. He did some wonderful guides to cities. He did a book where he had students model various cities in clay, all at the same scale. And when you looked at it, all of a sudden you realize, that Venice really is this little handkerchief-sized thing when you start looking at it in the context, especially of a Western city like Los Angeles. And he did a lot of other publications. He did some travel guides to cities that were very insightful. I don't know if he actually built things. I know
he did. The travel guides are called Access LA, Access Super Bowl.
Yeah, I heard about them.
Then he founded TED.
Yes, excuse me, he found that as well. Yes, which is, had a remarkable impact.
Right.
He was at North Carolina, was he not?
I think that's where he did the maps.
Yeah, he taught there.
Yeah. So who else can we hear from?
Come on, speak up.
What?
All right, if I may speak, I'm very humbled to
Sure.
be guys. It's very. So I would consider myself as the third generation of Kahn's teaching thing. I was lucky enough to be studying with Professor Williamson, James Williamson, my master degree, and we speaking of the seed. I believe so. Now I'm teaching at Texas A&M, and I'm trying to follow that Louis Kahn philosophy. That's actually, I believe I've been mentored by Williamson, who's like a very good carrier of this message. and now I assign myself kind of to move forward this message to the first year, at least junior designers. But yeah, it's been very privileged to be with this group and listen to all this Kahn influences. So I'm looking forward to read the book and learn more.
Thank you. Well, listen, you definitely want to read Kahn at Penn by Williamson, because there are lots of stories by people who studied with him and then went on to teach. And they describe how he influenced the way they teach. So I think you'll find that inspiring.
Yes, definitely. Actually, Williamson had given me a copy of that signed.
Okay.
It's beautiful. I'm reading through it. But thank you for the recommendation.
Good, good. Okay, who else? Do I have to call on people?
I will just comment that College Station isn't but about maybe 2.5 hours from Fort Worth. So if you haven't seen the Kimball, you can trek up here.
Thank you.
Anybody
Phil
else?
Mead Phil Mead from the University of Idaho.
Hi.
Hi. What is your take on the meaning of the building's meaning is in the plan? Is he referring to Corbu's, the plan is the generator, or is there something else that he's meaning?
Okay. Actually, I have a whole section on that in my new book. I remember when I went to work in New York offices, I bumped into a lot of Cooper Union people, and they would take a building like Falling Water, build a model, take it apart, put it back together again. So at Cooper, Haydak was having them very much think in 3 dimensions. And of course, Rudolph's art and architecture building is very 3-dimensional. The section is very important, of course, in Exeter, but in the medical towers, every floor is the same. And so Kahn more thought in plan than in section. And in the plan, the relationship of the rooms to each other are the relationships of the functions of those rooms. If you think of, I just before getting online here was working on a chapter on the Beaux-Arts in my new book on the Philadelphia School. And a typical Beaux-Arts building, there's an entrance portico, a foyer, a great hall, may have a dome, 3 domes at the Metropolitan Museum, a great stair, galleries, and then large, medium, and small spaces. Every Beaux-Arts building has that organization, just about. Well, Kahn does the exact same thing. So that addresses the process of how do you get from your street self to your viewing, for example, viewing art self. So in the street, you're armored up. You might jostle people, they might jostle you. And in front of art, you have to be open to receive it. How do you make that transformation? The spaces that you go through perform that function. In the Museum of Modern Art, you come in the door, there's the art. You know, there's no such process. Very different philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So Kahn has that exact same organization in Yale British Center, but done totally modernly. But it's the meanings of each of the series of experiences you're having and how the rooms convey, contain, and interrelate those meanings.
Well, you have a Piranesi map behind you,
Right.
which is the plans are fantastic. And
Yeah,
Kahn
right.
used to have a Piranesi map in his office.
Right. So you'll find on this map, you'll find the medical towers, you'll find Exeter,
Yeah,
you'll find the Salk Center, they're all there.
yeah.
Did he have anything additional to say about the section then? Did it have a?
Well, obviously in Exeter and Dhaka, it's very much a building with section. And a lot of that is about bringing the light in, the meaning of the center and what's peripheral around it. Section's important in Kimball for the way the cycloid shell is washed by light. So they're each worth delving into on their own. Who else?
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
Hi. I would like to ask you many things. Congratulations for your book. You talk about architecture as philosophy, but in this way, you show us the way of two contrasting things: the light and silence, the measurable and unmeasurable, the poetry and the knowledge. How do you think that Kahn makes and crosses the lines between these two oppositions, between these two that we could say contradictory elements? How is the creative process of work? And this is the first question. I don't know if it was understood.
Okay,
And
stay with that one while I have it. Let me start with some very, very broad examples. Let's contrast the Katsura Imperial Villa, Japanese villa. Jump over to YouTube images, Google Images, and get the plan while I'm talking. It's asymmetrical, integrated with nature, walls totally slide open. When they're closed, they're made out of paper. So there's interpenetration of inside and outside. Human beings are an integral part of nature. Now look at the Villa Rotunda by Palladio. Central symmetrical space. Human being goes in the center, surveys out. Man is the measure of all things. To measure, you need to be at the center of an XYZ coordinate to measure from. Front, back, left, right, surveying, observing, understanding, and controlling nature. So two totally different notions of what a human being is in the Villa Rotunda and Katsura Imperial Villa. Mm-hmm. Now, interesting to contrast Mies and Kahn, where Mies is very much just 20 years before Mies would get the Chrysler Building, New York's favorite building, implying a pinnacle of a hierarchical corporate organization. Walter Chrysler symbolically being in the top pinnacle, head of the corporation. In the Seagram Building, where is, what's his name, Braniff? What's the head of the?
Brofman.
Brofman, thank you.
Yeah.
Where is Brofman's office? Probably a corner, but there are a lot of corners. And the point is, now it's the organization man. That's the organizing principle of the late 50s. Well, that ain't Apple or Google. All those people are walking around with turtlenecks and sneakers. And they're, they're worth $100 billion. So the architecture is reflective of these changing cultures. What was your next question?
Thanks so much. And the next question is, how do you think that the concept of void, the void, is present in Kahn's architecture?
Well, one of the wonderful things about the Beaux-Arts was the poché. And we see a little bit of that in the Pyrenees in back of me. It's interesting how Zoom's artificial intelligence works. You can see my hand, and now it loses it. If I pick up my cat, it doesn't see it at all. It doesn't pick up cats. But anyway, the thick black or hatched walls of the Beaux-Arts where the walls and the spaces are mutually sculpting each other. And Kahn is inspired by that. He doesn't make thick walls because that's not our technology, but he does recreate that effect in things like the Salk Meeting House, the Bryn Mawr Dorm, etc. So he's very interested in the play between solid and void. So somebody else.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
So currently I'm in NJIT, I'm a 5th year, and we're designing a building adjacent to the Kahn Memorial on Roosevelt Island. So I was wondering what buildings I should look at by Kahn. And then I have a follow-up question after that.
How close and what kind of building?
It's going to be a museum of the Four Freedoms, and right where that stair is, it's like 30 feet away.
Okay. Here's what I would suggest. Start with Kahn's Exeter Library, split it down the middle, pull it apart, and enter between to get to the memorial.
Yeah.
Now, that's just a start. Then you'll be the designer. But I think we don't want to block his axis. So maybe a split building will respect his axis. And we want to contain, animate, and energize that axis. And that building's got a lot of energy. Or imagine it take a Pantheon, split it, and enter between. What was the follow-up?
If you would like to be on the jury for a final review.
Just put, it's jlobell@pratt.edu. So send me an email anytime.
Noted. Thank you so much, John.
Great. Any other questions? As people want to get to dinner.
Yeah, I have one question, if I can ask you.
Sure.
Thank you, John, for the wonderful presentation. It was really nice to listen to it. I have a question a little bit maybe different than other people because I'm a landscape architect. So I wanted to somehow ask from landscape architecture discipline. What's the connection of Louis Kahn to Piranesi? Because you explained in the beginning of your lecture that he had it next to the wall or somehow on the wall. So this is my first question. What's the connection of Louis Kahn to Piranesi? You explained it a little bit, but maybe you can say something more.
Okay, hold your second question.
Yes, and my second question is about the Salk Institute and actually the connection of Louis Kahn to Barragan, because then I was also reading.
Hold up. Let's do the first one first.
Yeah.
I just, before I got on, in doing a book on the Philadelphia School, Penn was the leading Beaux-Arts school in the 1920s when Kahn was there. And that's an objective statement. It won the most gold medals or blue ribbons or whatever, those prizes. And so what was the relationship of the Philadelphia School to the Beaux-Arts, the modern Philadelphia School, in 50 to 65, and Kahn to the Beaux-Arts? And Kahn studied with the greatest Beaux-Arts teacher, Paul Philippe Cray, who did beautiful buildings and also bridges like the Ben Franklin Bridge and railroad trains, railroad engines. But in reaching back, I think Kahn does not look at the Beaux-Arts. He skips it and goes right to Rome. Rome is the mother, well, if you are a certain kind of architect, Rome is the mother of all architecture. I mean, an architect can just come to tears in Rome, in Piranesi's renderings. The richness of form, the play of void and poche, the plays of symmetry, the sculpting of space. When I was a student, fortunately, I went to Europe at a time when we just climbed up the towers of of Sagrada Familia, Gaudi. You're not allowed to do that anymore. But we just climbed around the bath at Herculaneum. We just walked, we were climbing up it, climbing down it. I said, my God, this is Kahn. Now, I'm not enough of a scholar to go through his journals and find out if he made it to Herculaneum, but as far as I'm concerned, he did. And we see it in the Exeter, is inspired by Herculaneum. So the rich play of form that the Romans mastered with their concrete is all over Kahn's late work. A little bit of Boulez, little bit of Ledoux, but it's mostly Rome. Your second question.
Yeah, well, actually, because Piranesi, what he represented on the map was somehow pioneering, because what he described was mostly, he was talking about public space. So this is what was somehow really obvious in his map. So I was wondering that maybe Louis Kahn was using somehow the concept of the public space somehow from Piranesi. But my second question is about the Salk Institute, and I wanted to ask with the connection with Louis Barragan, because he was somehow proposing the open space and of course the water stream. And in my opinion, it's also a reference to some kind of Islamic culture or Islamic design. So maybe you can say something about the connection to Louis Kahn to Louis Barragan.
Well, second only to Rome is Islamic architecture, particularly Persian. And the play of geometries there is just incredible. And particularly in the Great Mosque in Isfahan, where you get the an orientation of the building and then, or an orientation of the site, then the building has to be tilted to align with Mecca, and how they handle that geometry is just incredible. And Kahn does it beautifully in Bangladesh, where he makes ball bearings so it'll just turn because the entrance is a mosque. Famously, the client said, we need 4,000 square feet of storage at the entrance. He says, what the hell's that for? He said, prayer rugs, we're Muslim. Every time we go in or out of the building, we have to pray. He said, you mean you tell me that you pray every time you go in and out of the building? I said, yeah. So, well, that means the entrance is a mosque. We'll make it 40,000 square feet. So anyway, the Barragan story, I don't know anything more than anyone else does. It's been told many times. They were working on Salk. They wanted Barragan. They kept having miscommunications, no email in those days. Finally got a hold of him. He came up to the site. They said, and they'd always shown planting in the models. They said, what kind of planting do you propose? He said, no planting, just pave it. It's a facade to the sky. And I don't know if he or Kahn or somebody else is responsible for the strip of water, but that's the story I know.
Yeah, all right, thank you so much.
All right, anybody else?
One more quick one.
Yeah.
The first time I was in the Kimball was in the 70s, shortly after it was built. And I have a vague memory that the lights, the slit in the middle of the building and the lights or the shields, I'm not sure the appropriate term. My memory tells me that there was a problem and that was a solution. Is that correct?
They were always shown in all the drawings. Interestingly, the exact geometry of them to get an even wash is not what you would think it would be and had to be generated by computer. It was done by a famous lighting engineer. My apologies to him, I don't remember his name, but he did the lighting for Kahn's Yale British and also Venturi's Sainsbury wing of the National Gallery. But there's a documentary movie long before Nathaniel Kahn's movie in which they show construction, and they built the first cycloid shell, we're supposed to call them, for the library, because they knew it was going to be a mess because they were in a learning curve. And sure enough, it was pretty messy. And it's exposed concrete. You take the formwork off, you look up, it looks like a sidewalk. Exposed concrete is not a pleasant material. And Mrs. Kimball comes in, who had written the check, and looked up and said, "Oh my God, we got an ugly building." And then they put the reflectors in and it glowed and everybody was happy. So that's in that documentary movie. If you have access to an architecture library, they probably have it.
So they were an addition.
No, if you look at the drawings,
They were in.
those vaults,
Okay.
cycloids, I'm not supposed to call them vaults. Those vaults, the curve is generated by putting a light on a bicycle, the rim of a bicycle wheel, and rolling it. And you get that curve. And it brings the forces down vertically better than an arc of a circle. But if you look, the shape of that shell changes over many drawings, but there's always a slit and always a reflector in all the drawings. So I wasn't in the office at the time, but that's what I've seen in the drawings.
Thank you.
Anything urgent? Well, thank everybody for coming. If you want to get a hold of me.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
This is Bob Kramer. I don't know if you remember me. We were friends at meeting at Pratt.
Yeah.
My dad.
Listen, I am, I had a wonderful time with Kahn. I called him, I was asked, Carl Lynn, I was working on a thesis at MIT, and Carl Lynn came over and he saw my thesis, and the next week he was down with Kahn. He told me about it, told Kahn about it, and actually joined him at anyway, to make a long story short, Kahn invited me to become his poet in residence, but I actually won the Prix de Rome, so I couldn't actually go down there to join him. But the first time on the phone, he said, "Come down to Philadelphia, but take the train, don't fly." And as it turned out, I had to fly because something came up. Anyway, when he died, nobody knew where, he was booked. He was coming from Bangladesh. He flew into London, and then he flew to New York, and he was booked for a flight into Philadelphia, but he never made it back.
Right.
And he went missing for 3 or 4 days, and they found him in the morgue in Philadelphia. And he was, they found him in Penn Station. Here's what I'm trying to get to. They found him in Penn Station, in the men's room of Penn Station. So that was the story of how Kahn died in the men's room in Penn Station.
Yeah, if you're interested in that story, the book, You Say to Brick, does a great deal of research on exactly what happened. So listen, everybody, jlobell@pratt.edu, that's me. If anybody wants to get a hold of me, and if you'd like to be on a mailing list for Pratt's other events, I don't know an address for that, so just write me and I'll forward it to the right people and they'll get you on the list. So thank you, everybody.